Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show is Now It's November. Actually, it really isn't. That's a fib. It's the last week of October, but by the time you see this show, it will be November because it takes me a little while to edit. In the past, in Novembers, I have invited you to come down to my little place on Bearskin Neck. If you would like to see it, this is your last chance, I think. My landlord sold the building, and I don't know what the rent will be next year. So for this year, November 2017, on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, I'm hosting writers. Whether you write poetry or song lyrics, short stories, nonfiction, magazine articles, or items for periodicals, whether you write your own little web blog or you write greeting card phrases, come on down. You don't have to write a novel in NaNoWriMo to come in and meet other writers. As a matter of fact, Gloucester has its own writing center, and that kind of gave me the impetus to say, hey, for those of you in Rockport that would like to come down on the Bearskin Neck when I bet 90% of the tourists have gone home, and because of that, many of the businesses are closed, you can come down and see the back side of motif number 1. Share a cup of tea with me. Come and write. It's 67A Bearskin Neck, and it's absolutely free. Just come on down. Keep me company. You can bring your laptop or your little pad or even your phone. You can type into your phone now. Or you can bring a journal, an actual paper journal with a pen. Sometimes I find my best writing is with a fountain pen on paper. To that end, I bought myself a book at the closing of Toad Hall. It's called The Pocket Muse, and the author is Monica Wood. She says some interesting things. One of her writing prompts is a photograph of an old hand pump for water. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, I already used that image in my writing. I remembered being with my grandmother on my great-grandfather's farm and hand pumping water or pulling buckets of water down by the barn out of the well to water the animals. So it was kind of neat. I saw her image and I thought, oh, cool. So I'm hoping to get some nice tips from the Pocket Muse Endless Inspiration. She's written several of these. And one of the ones that I thought was kind of interesting is Margaret Livsky from Barnes & Noble. She was having an interview and she said, I almost always give fiction as gifts. And that's what I hope to receive too. And then underneath it says, aside from the cash output, there's no downside to book buying. You get to frequent your local bookstore, support your writing brethren or sistren, and then when you're finished reading, you get to keep the book forever, donate it to your local library or school or shelter, resell it to a used bookstore, or read it again. Books last longer than candy, and they're cheaper than flowers. Say it with books. And there's a quote here from Desiderius Erasmus, 1466 through 1536. When I get a little money, I buy books, and if there's any left over, I buy food. I don't know that we're all that passionate about writing and books anymore. I bought this book at the closing of the Toad Hall bookstore. It was such a sad event for me because on a gray, dismal, rainy day like today is, I would bundle up and throw my slicker on and go down to Toad Hall, buy myself a book, come home, make myself a cup of Mexican hot chocolate, the kind that has cinnamon and a little cayenne pepper in it, and then curl up in my recliner with my old dogs, Jolie and Simon, and I would read a book. My puppy Dax and my new little rescue Cookie Monster are not quite as snuggly as my former dogs. Cookie now will sit on the love seat with me, but there's always a foot of space. And when I pick Dax up, he'll kiss me, snuzzle me, and sniff me, but then he wants to get down and play. Things change. They don't remain the same. I had my 65th birthday last week, and I talked to you about the fact that when I went to Naomi's wedding, we stopped for brunch in Connecticut at a place called Barcelona. And the manager of that restaurant told me that here in Massachusetts, there were Barcelona. So for my birthday, my son Andrew and my husband Kevin took me to the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum. And it's a special time for them right now. They're having the JFK Centennial. And so we went there, and it was a little bit startling for me because we got our tickets, and Andrew kept his, but Kevin says general admission adult, and mine says general admission senior. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be a senior. And then I thought, I've earned these gray hairs. If any of you want, you can friend request me on Facebook. I have a Facebook account, and for my birthday this year, I donated my birthday to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And if you look on my Facebook page, it says that I had a goal of $200 and I raised $190. Well, that's not quite accurate because a couple of my generous friends gave me checks. They felt uncomfortable about revealing their credit card numbers on the internet, especially on Facebook, thinking that perhaps they might get hacked and that their identity might be stolen. I felt very blessed that I was able to raise $295 for missing and exploited children. One of the gifts was startling. I was like, wow, that's a lot of money that my friend donated to me. But I'd like to warn you that when you write out checks, you have to be careful who you give a check to. Like, my friends are perfectly safe because I would never do anything nefarious with a check from a friend of mine. But on the bottom of a check from a bank is your bank's routing number, your bank's ID number, and your account number. In today's nefarious world of cyber crime, thieves that have that information can turn around and use your account number to do identity theft and maybe take funds from your account. I think this thing of stealing money from strangers with abandon is deeply, deeply disturbing. I mean, it's one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal. And yet people who steal feel proud of themselves. Ha ha ha, I stole money. And I stole money from this many people, as if that was some sort of an accomplishment rather than a crime and a sin. Something to think about. Last time I talked to you on the show that's titled 550 500 about Martin Luther King and how I had gotten a copy of Here I Stand and that I hadn't quite made it through Here I Stand. And one of the things that happened is I watched video about Martin Luther King that used footage from a movie, and the commentator said that Hitler was inspired by Martin Luther King. I found that startling. So for me, I'm at an age where my eyesight is starting to go. I have an empty glasses case right now because I took my very expensive lightweight frames into the Vision Depot and they're making me up brand new lenses because my prescription is quite a bit stronger than it used to be. And they had to send the glasses out to be made because this particular frame, they drill a hole through the glass lens to put the sidebar on. And the glasses had to be sent to Texas. And I just got the call last night on my message machine that my glasses are finally in after 3 weeks. So I'm going to go pick those up. But because my eyesight is starting to go and I'm developing cataracts, I tend to listen to audiobooks from different places, Blackstone or different places, but I purchased a copy of Here I Stand, which was written in the 1950s. Actually, it was copyrighted in 1950, so I gather it must have been written in the late 1940s. It had to take a great deal of research in order to write that book, talking about Martin Luther's childhood and his entrance into the monastery and his eventual break with Catholicism, and then his invective against the popes and his splitting off from the Catholic Church along with others, which becomes the Protestant Reformation. And so I got the audiobook and I was able to finish Here I Stand. Some of the things I learned distressed me because my church, the United Church of Christ in Rockport, the UCC, the locals call it the Congo, is of Lutheran descent. UCC has its own articles of faith, and they're somewhat different from those of Martin Luther, but it does have a Lutheran heritage. And I found out that Martin Luther got blamed for the peasant rebellion. He also was involved with the Anabaptists, first as a champion, asking the nobles and the royals, please don't kill them, don't slaughter them and burn them. He stated that he felt a person should have the right to his own beliefs within his own home. But he turned around and said, but people should not commit blasphemy against God in public, which is kind of interesting because when Martin Luther confronted the papacy, some of the things he said were perceived as blasphemy, even though at that time he was a tonsured monk. It's odd to think that 500 years have passed since then. But there was a section in the book where Martin Luther was defending Jewish people who were protesting the impoverished life they were living under the nobles. And one of the things that he talked about was that he felt that Jewish people should be allowed to work the land, and that he chastised the nobility for excluding Jewish people from not only agriculture, but also commerce, and forcing them into what he called usury. In the 1500s, banking had not established itself as a big part of the culture, and so if you were in dire straits and needed money, you had to go get a loan. And since Jewish people were forbidden to own and farm land, and they were thrown out of commerce, they became money lenders. And the Rothschilds, Rothschild means the red shield. That was an emblem on a barn where the Rothschilds became coin dealers and money lenders. Well, Martin Luther first defends Jewish people to have their own religion, and he says, they're a bit stiff-necked because they did not accept Jesus Christ as their Messiah, even though they awaited a Messiah. And so Martin Luther decides that he's going to go and convert these 6 rabbis. And they turn around and try to convert him to Judaism. And that gets them thinking, and they start talking to new Lutherans and trying to convert them to Judaism. And at that point, territorial, patriarchal Martin Luther comes out against them and says they should be deported to Palestine. And if they won't leave, their books should be seized and burned. Even the Torah, which is the basis of the Old Testament of the Bible, and that the synagogues should be burned. And I thought, oh, there's the Nazi connection. And the narrator who narrated the book talks about that these particular pamphlets never made it to Sweden and Denmark and England, because at that point in time, all the Jewish people that were known to be Jewish had already been expelled. I found that anti-Semitism distressing. Our world is so strange. There was this big advertising campaign about Frontline and finding out what happened to Hillary Clinton during the election because of Putin. It's a 2-night documentary, so I watched the first night, and I got to see Hillary looking on her cell phone when Gaddafi was apprehended and murdered. And at first, she's shocked and distressed, like all normal humans would be when witnessing a murder. But then later, stressed and tight-throated, she does an air horn that they came to depose Gaddafi and that they had succeeded. Now, Gaddafi was no prince among men. He was sexist in the extreme and repressive and totalitarian, and he was responsible for the murder of many of the people under his leadership. But for a Secretary of State of the United States to give an air horn when a leader of a country is killed, I found that disgusting. I was like, oh. It made me think that I doubted if the kings of England or Denmark or Sweden were given the air horn when the royalty of France was beheaded in Paris. Like, don't you understand that there's an interconnection here? So in this documentary, the idea is proposed that Vladimir Putin was angry with the United States and afraid to be deposed and murdered like Saddam Hussein and Omar Gaddafi. I think perhaps with good reason. And that makes my blood run cold, gives me the heebie-jeebies and the shivers. I've talked before that I found the presidency of George Bush Sr. distressing because when he was in the CIA, there were a great many assassinations. It was really strange to me to go to the JFK Museum and see the assassination of JFK again in black and white footage. To stand near Bobby Kennedy's desk with his assassination at that point, you know, they reran that over and over. I had not been old enough when John F. Kennedy was elected to understand the state of the world. What I remember from that time period is that my grandmother cried. And I didn't understand because she didn't seem exactly sad. She seemed like a bit overwhelmed. And she told me, well, JFK is of Irish descent and he's Catholic. And because the British went to Ireland and conscripted soldiers, they drafted them. They took them by force of arms if necessary and stuck them on boats and sent them to America before the United States existed, when this area of the country was called the Boston States. And the British made the Irish fight against the insurgent British settlers who wanted their freedom. And so a lot of people in the New England area lost kinsmen, family members, to Irish soldiers who were drafted by the British. So when the Irish left Ireland and tried to come to the New World to be free, there were signs out, INNA, or, you know, Irish dogs. The INNA was Irish need not apply to jobs in factories or jobs in the mercantile or in commerce. It was odd to me that problems that faced the peasantry in Martin Luther's day, where peasants could be conscripted to go and fight the Crusades. One of the reasons that Martin Luther stood up against the popes is he did not want any more German people to be sent off on bloody crusades. He calls that era a time when we fought against the Turk. And in some of his writings, he lauds the Arabic Muslim people as being fierce fighters, dedicated warriors, and true to their faith. It's just kind of interesting to me. So right now, there's a special exhibition at the JFK Museum. It's his centennial. It's 100 years since his birth. I thought about that. You know, some people live to be 100 years. If I lived to be 100 years, that would be 35 years from now. Having worked in nursing homes, I don't know that I want to live to be 100 years old. But there's a special exhibition, you know, with his top hat and his gloves and stuff. My husband said when he found me the Barcelona wine bar in Brookline, and he and Andrew took me to this wine bar for my birthday, and we sat there eating spicy eggplant caponata again, and the one in Brookline is spicier than the one down in Connecticut. My son had mussels Diablo, and you know, we were playing Chinese restaurant. We were trading back and forth and tasting different things, and my eggplant caponata was spicier than the mussels from the devil. You know, it was kind of neat. But we were sitting there and sipping wine. It was sort of a rites of passage moment for me. I can remember my son talking about having a guy's night out with his father, and the two of them going out and having beer, and that it was really nice for him to sit and have beer with his dad. And I'm sitting there in a wine bar drinking wine, and my son's drinking beer, and my husband is the designated driver. So I had 2 glasses of wine, and I am a cheap drunk. I don't drink much, so when I do, I get loopy pretty quick. But it was kind of fun in a weird way to be with my son, the man, having tapas and wine. I got flan, and he got stuffed crepes for dessert, and my husband got apple crisp. And I think it was about at the dessert course that my husband said to me, you know, what struck me about listening to Kennedy's speeches is that at that time, we had a lucid, erudite president. I spent time peeking at Jackie's fashions. They had several of her dresses there, but they also had an interactive big screen that worked like a tablet, and you could forward or zoom in on her outfits. They were, they're dated. You know, Ole Cassini, and they're dated. It was interesting. They gave us a map. You know, we could have a map to the museum, and I thought, I don't need a map for the museum. I went to the ladies' room, and it said, do you want to go back to the exhibition? And I thought, yeah. And I went through the door to the exhibition. I wound up lost. I lost Kevin and Andrew because they were in this special exhibit hall with all the never seen before 100 items. I should have had this map with me. I'm there wandering around lost, not knowing how to get back to my spouse. It was weird to have a whole lot of people wish me a happy birthday on Facebook. 2 of them from my high school class back in Pennsauken High, New Jersey. And that I got 4 cards. You know, big 65, that's a big birthday. And I got 4 cards. Made me think that things are changing in the culture. I've shown you this before. This is a card I sent my husband. It's Minnie Mouse. We have a running joke in our family because when we went to visit Disney, Minnie Mouse came out in her costume and flashed a leg at Kevin and was flirting with my husband, that hussy. So we have a Minnie Mouse thing that goes on in our house. One of the presents I got from my friends was from Victor and Nancy, and I love it. It says, I can't clean because I get distracted by all the cool things I find. Now, I'm a bit of a hoarder, and we're going to talk about that again on another show, because to be a collector is one thing, and that's fine, but to be a hoarder, maybe not so much. If I took everything I bought at the second glance back to the second glance, they could probably feed several families for a month. I really need, I go there and I buy things to support the food pantry because there are people who are out of work or who have mental health problems or who are physically disabled, or their skill set for jobs has been taken over by robots or computers and they're no longer viably employable. I brought a book for you that I haven't finished reading yet. I found it kind of interesting. I got it at Barnes & Noble. It's called Sacred Practices for Everyday Life, Kindling the Native Spirit, and it's by Denise Lynn. And I'm not done with it yet. I'm also not done with What Happened by Hillary Clinton. Seeing her happy that someone was deposed and killed. I suppose if you're a Secretary of State and you're responsible for helping generals run wars, you get a little bit hardened to death, but I don't know. It was disturbing just the same. I found a book at the closing of Toad Hall, Rivers of Sunlight, and How the Sun Moves Water Around the Earth by Molly Bang and Penny Chisholm. I would really like to recommend this series if you have children or grandchildren. Their other books are My Light, Living Sunlight, Ocean Sunlight, and Buried Sunlight. And in the back of this children's book, which explains the water cycle and global warming so cleanly and clearly that a child who's into picture books could understand how global warming is affecting the planet. And it's simple, but it's also very learned. I think sometimes true simplicity takes a great deal of wisdom. There's this expression that you know someone is not a writer when they advise a new writer, don't tackle a novel, write a short story. In my experience, a short story takes much more finesse to craft than a novel where you have 300 to 1,000 pages to get your ideas across. If you're going to do it in a short story, you have to be really skillful and capable of self-editing, which unfortunately I'm not. But in this book, there was a whole thing in the back for grown-ups that explains in more detail so that if the child has questions, you have the ammunition for answers about water and climate change, humans and the water cycle, important things about water that we left out of this book. It was just kind of fascinating to me. And I felt sad, that this is probably, well, it is the last time I could buy books from the Second Glance. In the book on writing, The Pocket Muse, there's a little phrase that she put in about tackling the blank page, about writing haiku. I shared with you a couple of shows ago that I had purchased this coloring book, and I decided instead of crayon or colored pencil, I would use watercolor. The image attracted me. It's a woman sitting in full kimono, and she's playing a Japanese musical instrument, and it looks like she's sitting in a sail. And on the bottom of the boat are a couple of fish. Now, those of you that have been with me since the beginning, and I know there are a couple of you out there, because every time you see me in public, you tell me, keep up your show, keep going. My very first 2 shows, I was upset because a friend of mine who works for NOAA was laid off, and the Congress, which laid her off, continued to collect their paychecks. Well, my friend sat with me at dinner last night, and she was telling me she was deeply distressed because she reads every day this industry periodical, and she told me, don't eat farm-raised fish, and definitely don't eat farm-raised shrimp. Eat wild-caught shrimp. And she went on for quite a while about the ecological impact of fish farming. It made me think, of units of production, and how ever since the lords used the peasants to till the land, and then the church charged the peasants a tithe, and the landlords came and took some of their produce, whether it be animal or vegetable, that we consider other beings of lesser value. There was a big to-do on NPR that Dr. Zhao in China has spliced a gene from mice into pigs so that pigs could burn body fat to stay warm, and by doing so, they also would become leaner, that the meat, the pork meat of pigs would become leaner, that pigs didn't have the gene that had them burn body fat for heat. I've told you before, I have thyroid disease, and I have what's called cold intolerance. If I'm below 60 degrees, I get uncomfortable, and below 55, my teeth start to chatter. Whereas most people, they could be in 60 and 55 degrees, and they'd turn rosy in the cheeks, and their body would begin burning their fat stores to make them warm. Prior to central heating, everybody had to burn fat to stay warm at night because you banked your fire so that your house didn't burn down because of sparks popping out of logs and setting your house on fire. So before you went to bed at night, you banked your fire in the fireplace, or you didn't continue to add wood to your wood-burning stove. People got up in the morning. It was darn cold in their house. Those people tended to eat probably even more than we do, and yet they were slender. First off, they had physically active lifestyles. Their labor was physical labor for the most part. But also, they burned body fat for heat. And they didn't have a lot of sugar in their food. If you wanted sweetness, you grew beets, or you went out and you braved bees to raid hives in order to get honey. I did something this yesterday that I didn't think I'd ever do in my life. I desecrated a book. It's called The Inspiration to Paint Watercolors, and I bought it at the second glance, and it looked fascinating. I was like, oh wow, there's a marver. Somebody's using powdered pigment, which I use in encaustic, and I've also made oil paint from it, but I've never made marvered powdered pigment into watercolor, although I have gum arabic. I probably could do it. So I was like, oh wow, how did they do it? And there's an egg yolk in the picture, and I thought, oh, they're making their pigments with egg to use as watercolor. I thought, fascinating. But so I buy this book and I go to peek under the flap and I find a stain. Now, my little Mr. Simon, the Papillon, was a rescued, intact male who was driven to mark his territory. Now, I'm not sure whether somebody spilled coffee with cream and sugar or whether the book was low on a shelf and got a little fireman like Simon doing his business on it, but it was growing a science project. So I wound up taking the book cover and the first several stained pages and ripping them off and pitching that into the trash. I thought about how, if you have physical books in our ecology of 7 going on 8 billion people on the planet, that we shouldn't be cutting any more trees to make books. And although I'm going to miss the Toad Hall a great deal when they're gone, this is a heavy little pile. It must weigh like 4.5 pounds. And I could put all that information on my telephone and it wouldn't weigh an extra ounce. I've told you before that I'm a sugar addict. It's not something I'm proud of. It's something I'm kind of ashamed of, but I bring it up because except for Overeaters Anonymous, which I found a little distressing, nobody else seems to be tackling the fact that there's sugar in almost every processed food of every kind, and it goes by all these different names: sugar alcohols, the toses, and sucrose and lactose and fructose and high fructose corn syrup. I think something about all these sugars is impeding people's ability to burn fat. I look around me and I am not the only heavy person, not by a long shot. So the Buddha teaches that if you can't do something drastic, like join a monastery and become a monk and pray 7 times a day, like Martin Luther did, that maybe you could show compassion to other people, like Hillary did not for Gaddafi. And that maybe you could tackle your problems a small piece at a time. So for years, I have tried to give up coffee because I put 4 sugars in that coffee. When I discovered coffee, I was a little girl, and my grandfather used to use Domino sugar cubes because where we lived in southern New Jersey was very humid and damp, and if you had loose sugar in a bowl, you got lumps of sugar. So my grandmother would buy Domino dots, which are wetted sugar shaped into little, they weren't cubes, they were rectangles, but you get the idea. And he would dunk one of those into his coffee and give it to me. The French call that a duck, like quack, quack, a pato, a duck. So I was a finicky, skinny little thing, and if I ate everything on my plate, which was a really bad way to train a child to eat even after you're full, even if you don't want to eat, you have to clean that plate or get hit. And my grandfather didn't like it if my grandmother hit me. And so he would bribe me with these coffee-dunked sugar cubes. I graduated from that to coffee ice cream. And when I was a newlywed, my husband accidentally picked up my coffee cup, took a sip, and spit it, and went, "Oh my God, that's not coffee, it's pancake syrup." Now this is the man that takes the maple syrup and just slathers it on his pancakes. But because I wanted to try to tackle the sugar thing, and going cold turkey and not having any sugar at all has not worked for me for longer than 6 weeks at a stretch, I decided I would try teas, and over the years I've tried every artificial sweetener known to man. So my friends, Victor and Nancy, they took Kevin and I out to the Happy Belly in Gloucester. Some of you might remember it as Alchemy or the Sunny Day Cafe, but it's now a little self-serve place, and it's low-key enough that there were 4 people sitting at a table playing chess when we were there. And the barista made me a matcha. Think Japanese tea ceremony and this frothy green liquid. Now, the very first sip of matcha sort of tastes like cooked spinach. It has like what they call a vegetal or vegetable taste, but the second sip is kind of sweeter. I don't know what happens to your taste buds, but something about matcha green tea was palatable to me without sugar. I tried teas like chai spice black tea, and I need 2 sugars in that. My grandmother's tea was Lipton tea or red rose tea. So I went and I was at Charlie's place, and I thought, I'm going to be good. I'm not going to have Coca-Cola. I'm going to have unsweetened iced tea. And that was also kind of like, okay, iced tea. And I said, well, what do you make your iced tea with? She said Lipton. So I went out and I bought Lipton iced tea and to make iced tea. And they now have the little tea bags in individual little compartments that are foil sealed to keep in the flavor. And I've talked to you before about Lula's Pantry. Conrad gave me a gift. He gave me a bag of chocolates that think like M&Ms. They had a hard coating on them, but they were painted up and shaped like pebbles. My very first trip to Cape Cod when I was like in grammar school, my grandmother bought me a cellophane bag of stones, and they were really chocolate candy. I can remember thinking, wow, how did you do that? How did you turn those stones into chocolate candy? She ruffled my hair, told me I was an idiot. So I went to Lula's and I got my wonderful gift, and I bought this tea called gin mate. I get it home, and it wasn't really matcha. It was toasted rice cereal and bits of popcorn. I was like, oh my goodness, I spent hours trying to get the actual tea out of this melange that they made. And then I remembered that Tivana had this ingenuity, and in the bottom was this little filter dealy bop. And you put that in, you put in your loose tea leaves, fill it with water, and then you put it on your cup, and it strains the tea for you. So I wound up having my Haney and Sons gin matcha that way. And I thought, I gotta have better matcha than that. So when I went out and I saw matcha on the menu, and I thought, oh my goodness, $6 for a cup of tea, it better be good. It was wonderful. So I sat on YouTube looking at matcha and the beautiful Oriental tradition of the tea ceremony, but also the labor-intensive growing and picking of fine tea used to make matcha. So I was at the Common Crow, and I purchased stone ground green tea powder, which is shade grown and stuff. Because when I went online to find matcha, it was $50 for a little container. So if you would like to try the green tea, this one was not that expensive, and it was $15.39, and you can make 30 cups from it. And they also had one matcha green tea, and it was from a different company that I used to like some of their stuff. So I decided, okay, I would get that. And then one of the problems with sugar addiction is you go somewhere other than your house, and someone serves you something, and you wind up ingesting sugar, and then you have to go through this whole withdrawal of sugar again. And seriously, it's like trying to kick the bottle or stop smoking cigarettes or stop smoking pot. Giving up sugar is hard. You crave it. And so I found this Aya matcha to go. And you can pitch one of these little packets into your purse, and then anywhere you go, you just ask for hot water, and you can make your own tea. And so I found it kind of interesting that, you know, Americans take soy sauce and they take wasabi powder and they mix it into this disgusting paste. You know, like, this brown goo on the edge of the plate, where the Japanese have the wasabi and they have the soy sauce, and they are separate, and there's ways to do sushi. That's what I wound up sending Naomi for her wedding to her new husband. I sent her a dim sum basket and chopsticks and a soy sauce dipper and chopstick stands and a sake set and a book on how to make sushi, because she and I used to make sushi together. And now that she's out in Oregon, I didn't know if her husband would like sushi. You know, if you like the idea of sushi but raw fish kind of makes you go, ew, try it with lox. Try it with smoked salmon. Anyway, so wish me good luck with my green tea adventure. I don't know if I'll be able to give up coffee, but I'm going to give it a try. And I wrote to Dr. Zhao in China, and I said, hey, Maybe your research could help obese people like me regain a normal body weight. We'll see what happens. I don't know if he's going to answer me or not. I'll see you in December. In the meantime, I'm going radio silent. I'm going to be doing NaNoWriMo. And if you want to visit me in person, come down to 67A Bearskin Neck Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, 1 to 3 in the afternoon, and come write with me for a couple of hours. You may have fun. This is Marjohn, and this has been Marjohn's Musings.